Hello, everyone. Sufit here. I'm here today with Charles B. Ticker in another episode of Mediation Minefield. What can make your mediation blow up or fizzle out without settlement? So today, Charles, I want to talk about another issue that we've discussed before, and I know you discuss this in your book as well. Um, what happens when you're discussing issues like who gets the cottage or what a business is worth, and you get the sense that there's something else really going on there? Can you tell us a little bit more about what might be going on that's going to prevent the matter from getting settled?
Well, as you know, I mediate sibling disputes, sibling estate disputes, and siblings bring a lot of layers of complexity to the mediation because they have this history. And you're at a mediation to discuss an estate dispute or a dispute arising out of a power of attorney involving a parent. And you have the issues to talk about and what the disputes about, but there are many things that are not set out in the dispute that are driving the dispute. And so you get to the mediation and you think you're talking about the case, and all of a sudden the parties want to talk about something that happened when they were kids, like 30, 40, 50 years ago. And what happens at these mediations and what makes them so challenging is there's this total lack of trust in each room, and as a mediator, my role is to build trust. And if you build some trust, you can take some baby steps towards settlement. But quite often they're stuck in the past where there's been a very bad experience or lack of trust. For example, and I talk about these in my book. Bobby Gets Bupkis, available on Amazon. A little cheap plug there. But I remember years ago, I was representing a client who was challenging a parent's will because he was left out of the will and he was suing his brother. And I was meet with him, and he only wanted to talk about when he was 9 years old, how his brother had thrown his pet turtle out the window, and he lost his pet turtle, died, and he was still talking about this, decades later, and it was something, of course, he never got over, and this was one of the things that was driving the dispute, is this animosity and this ill feeling that he held towards his brother, that he just couldn't forgive, who he couldn't forgive. I'll even give an example of my own situation. My sister is like 5 years younger than me, and when we were kids, she used to get into my stuff, like, always getting into my toys, games, whatever. And, you ever try play Monopoly without one of the little, game pieces, like the little houses or whatever, like, because she would take stuff and destroy it. And it got so bad that my dad finally had to get me this huge cabinet with a lock on it so I could lock up my toys and games. And I remember once I was so upset with her for getting into my stuff that I threw a shoe at her. And, like, she was 5, I was 10. You forget about it. Not a chance. Like, 20 years later, at her wedding, she mentions this incident about me throwing a shoe at her. I mean, we get along great, but, it was something she never got over. So this is what I see happening in these state mediations involving siblings. There's a lot of history, a lot of baggage, and sometimes you can't move forward with the settlement discussions until you try to deal with this lack of trust or these bad experiences that they've had with each other and one another in the past.
I imagine that's a tall order for a mediator to undo in one day what has been building over 50 years. But is it possible to get past that, or does that mean that the settlement, the mediation, is doomed to blow up?
It really depends on how deeply entrenched these emotions are. And I've seen mediations blow up because the parties are just not ready to even attempt a reconciliation, not even a reconciliation, attempt to put some of the past behind and move forward. So sometimes you have to consider perhaps, okay, let's see what we can do today, and maybe you want to meet up in another month or so and we'll continue on, or another couple of weeks. So that's something that could be considered. But my role is listening to the stories and empathizing with those stories of the past, but try my best to get the parties to focus on the present and on a future without conflict. But that can be a challenge uh, if there's been a very troubled history.
Well, and I imagine it would be even more challenging if it didn't even come to the surface, right? Because at least if the mediator sees it on the surface, if the parties, verbalize it, at least it can be dealt with. But if you're dealing with a mediation and you think you're talking about who gets the cottage or who gets the business, and really this other stuff is percolating underneath, I imagine it'd be even harder. Um, Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Our guest today has been Charles B. Ticker, estate mediator and litigator, in another episode of Mediation Minefield: What Can Make Your Mediation Blow Up or Fizzle Out Without Settlement. Charles, thank you very much.
My pleasure.